Okay, 7:17, I move to open the Conservation Commission meeting of August 17th, 2023. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Roll call vote, announce your name and your vote. Michael Lesser, aye.
Courtney Eck, aye.
Steve Scrimshaw, aye.
Go ahead, Steve.
Steve Scrimshaw, aye, present.
Jacob Strauss, aye.
Okay. Good, meeting's opened. On the agenda, the only fixed thing is the hearing on the regs. And then we have a number of site issues and other things. What I was going to do is, oops, here's Matt. You can let him in here. Okay. Carol, and Carol's here too. Okay. I know Kurt's not going to be here, so we're all here. What I suggest, as I started saying, I'm not sure what everybody heard. Whoop. Okay, I'm at. I was going to open up the hearing on the regs and then just continue it for maybe 20 minutes later, so that maybe we could take care of all of the site issues and other kind of issues that we have, and that way we won't. That way we could just then deal with the regs and deal with that. Oh, and good, Deshang is showing up. Does anybody have any issues or questions about doing it that way? Okay. Joyce, to do all the site, we have the COC and Prospect Street. We never know how long things are going to be, but I guess even if we drags on a little bit more, I'll just I'll give us like 15-20 minutes, you think, Joyce?
Yeah, I think so. If not, we can always continue it again.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, it's 7:20. I'm reopening the hearing on drafting some possible changes to the Sherborn wetland regulations. In order to deal with site issues for some people here and get that off the stuff there, I would like to move to continue this hearing until 7. I guess we'll do it at 7:40 tonight. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Michael, aye. Courtney,
Aye.
Jacob,
Aye.
Steve. Steve, you're on mute. Carol,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
Okay, you can, unless you guys have noise at home, you can certainly leave your things unmuted. Okay, let's start, since I see Deshang is here for 3 Prospect Street. Why don't we let's open do that. Joyce, do you want to, or Deshang, do you want to present?
Yes, you
But
want
we'll
me
have to present.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Can you share your screen, Deshang, or do you want me to put the plan up?
I can share the screen. Just give me a minute.
Okay.
I mean, I also have the plan up if you want.
It's just it's easier for me to point it.
Problem. No
Even
problem.
I'm sharing it. Otherwise, I'm happy to either way. So
Okay, why don't you go share and you can
Okay.
direct your
right,
cursor.
right. Okay, sure. Let me.
So Shang, is that a photo of your backyard behind you?
Yeah, it's my photo. I took a photo. So one of the day.
It's a big backyard. That's a pretty photo.
Oh, well, that back is not my backyard. I
Oh.
wish so. It's my, it's a St. Mark's. It's a, St. Mark's is in my backyard somehow. They have a few hundred acres of land. I do a jog in there. It's okay. Yeah, it's a beautiful site. Anyhow. Okay, thank you. Trying to grow up. So the requested change is mainly to accommodate a smaller house. Lots of times I just getting on the wrong plan so okay, yeah, no, it is the right one. The reason for the request for minor plan modification is because the owner get actual footprints of the house. If I blow up the originally approved plan, it's this red dash line, and then its shape is similar, and then the proposed one is this black line here. So it's a fully fit inside, and that recently, if you remember, at one point we had an existing well show on the plan, but we couldn't find it. And during the time exploration, we did find the existing well. Actually, surprised. If you look in, it's right on the wetland line, but it's buried in debris. So we find during the review with Border Health. So we find it and explore it to see if we can use it, since it's going to be outside of the isolated wetlands, especially after the mitigation. But it turned out we cannot use it. So the Border Health ordered that we get to decommission it. So that's one of the things we made a note here, because it's well not in working condition to be decommissioned. So, and they also request us to decommission the shallow well, so which is in that little house. So that's also made a note here. So at the time when we had approval, we don't know what we will have to do, but obviously we couldn't find that well anyhow. So that was not, we took it off. The surveyor at one point had it, but if you remember, when we just couldn't find it there, so we said maybe it was just proposed, so we took it off. But it is actually a well, and interesting enough, in the spring when the water was flowing here, we did a measurement in the well. It's a 5-foot dam. So that also, as it's just interesting sharing information. It's irrelevant, but it's kind of good. I think it's good to share that information with the commission. So when we were there, we definitely did lots of work and made our presentation say this wetland is due to that overflow of this shallow well, and that well right almost on the border kind of tell that story, because there's water flowing on the surface. But when we find the well, we measure it's 5 feet down from the surface. So in a way, the deeper groundwater table is down. So it's soaking into the ground. And that also makes sense because we flagged that almost right at that line. It's very coincident, but anyhow, so that's just some small additional information after the approval of the plan, and when we were doing the permitting with Border Health coming up. So in a way, there's no change in any other perspective, grading, anything. So the septic system tank is, because of the location of the house, this end is still kept the same. We have to overlap touching the existing house. So therefore, so there's no need to change in the location of septic tank within. So there's nothing in the buffer zone it's going to be changed, except that the 3 minor issues. So the houses shrink to have less impervious area. So we kind of, last time we already requested that plan change, but we used the wrong approved the plan as a base, so we had, there's too many versions, if you remember, so when we were did a quick change on it, we said, oh, yeah, it's just a smaller house, so we put on and then turned out we put on that wrong version, so you still see plantings in that, so I have to communicate with Joyce, and she feel that we should put it on the right plan and making make it the approval official on the right plan.
Okay.
Conclude my
Joyce, do you want to add anything, I guess, about,
My question is, just saying, how are you proposing to decommission the wells? What is the process?
well, it's not going to be any much of excavation. I believe that either they have to fill this with the clean sand and kept with the concrete. That's what I understand, because that's a full procedure they have to follow with not me, but well, have to be a certified well driller to do that work. I cannot do it. So that's what, if I understand right, that's what they will do. So.
All right, so no, maybe not so much an issue because that's a well pipe that they're gonna decommission.
Yeah, it's just
Like the
leaving in
one that's
place.
closest to the house.
Yeah.
Now the one in
yeah,
the back,
it-
the shallow well, do you have any idea on how they're going to proceed with that?
They have to fill with the clean sand. That's the minimum. They kept.
Okay.
I do. Yeah, and then whether they have to kept with this concrete or not, but I would assume they will have to, because it's dictated by the Board of Health, not by me. So I cannot propose anything they
Well,
don't accept.
It's kind of important to know how you're gonna access back there because everything is undisturbed for the most part.
Yeah,
How you're gonna get to that back,
there's a very less like in over here, it's definitely have to have some temporary so we probably have to find a temporary pass to so since well, I think there was like a kind of like a pass coming down this way. It's a less vegetation, so probably at the time I would so making a request that so Joyce, you go and check it out. So I will tell the well driller when they doing that one, probably we should be notified. So you can make a notes to the Board of Health too, so that when they oversee that things can be coordinated with the commission.
okay, so my mini concern is that do you believe they need to bring a machine back there? Can they just bring it in buckets? How do you anticipate? It wasn't open when I was there, so I couldn't look down and see what it looks like.
The well is about 3 foot diameter and about 12 feet deep. And so if it's just by bucket, it will probably take a lot of bucket to do it, unless they can pump it over to there. So, I mean, I have, from my perspective, I really don't have any interest to, should leave it open because that water bubbles up in the springtime, but that's not up for me to say it, which actually the water is sustained in this isolated wetlands. So I definitely feel they shouldn't, even they should fill, if they'll fill with really clean medium coarse sand, and if they cap it, they have to cap it on the top. Otherwise the water won't coming out. If they can dumping truck of concrete into it, that's probably not the right way to do. So yeah, I know they fill with sand, so it will. So probably, what I mean, I do have further more information, so you can talk to Mark, or I can send Mark a a quick email and see what is normally they require a well driller to decommission a well.
So it has to be defined as a well. I mean,
Yeah.
because it can't just be like an open pit, I guess, or covered. Okay, so there's an issue. Okay, I was just curious whether there's some other way to define it so that it doesn't have to be just a.
There's a pump in
Sand.
it. There's an old pump abandoned in it, so there's actually there's irrigation hose coming out of there.
Okay, and there,
So-
and it's 12, and it's fully, and it's accurately 12 inches, 12 feet deep. Is,
That's what I measured it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's-
we have some other comments from people. I'm just gonna move it along. Carol, did you want to speak? And then I thought I saw her.
I was gonna follow up on what Deshang said, because my recollection was that that well kind of functions as an artesian well, that it bubbles up, and that was really had a lot to do with the wetlands there. So I think if we can, it would be good to make sure that it would be good if this could be capped in such a way that it's filled with sand, but doesn't, have an impervious
right.
cap that will prevent the water from continuing to flow into the wetland. And this is an unusual situation. I don't think we've dealt with it before, but Deshang, you seem somewhat uncertain about how the well will be capped, but it's on the property that you're representing. So is there a way to propose to Board of Health to help them understand? And maybe, Michael, you might have some thoughts about this, how we can, recommend to Board of Health that be filled and made safe in such a way that no one is going to fall into it and, but that it still the water can still flow out.
Okay, let's have the other people talk and then we'll come back to this issue here. Courtney?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know how we can approve a plan without the information on it as to how the well is going to be accessed and closed. And if there are certain requirements from the Board of Health for closing this particular kind of well in order to protect the groundwater, then the applicant or Deshang should talk to them and find out what that is. Because if there's health requirements, then fine, we need to follow those, but we're not going to come up with how to fill the well.
Right, I don't know what this kind of well there's different rules, I guess. Does anybody else want to make a comment? I saw you, Brian, you had your hand up. Do you still have your hand up?
Sorry, Michael. Yeah, the abandonment of the well should be pursued and done in accordance with whatever a mass licensed well driller says the protocol should be. I understand there's a desire to keep that conduit for the release of underlying groundwater open because it's related to the wetlands. But if such a condition exists, the existence of a 12-inch or 36-inch diameter well, for that matter, really wouldn't matter. I would recommend it be grouted with a tremie grout from the bottom up to avoid any upward or downward movement of material one way or the other. But it's a mass licensed well driller, and I think it falls into their purview. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I think we just have to find out what the regs are. Jacob?
I mean, my question is kind of the same as Carol's. I want to understand what we expect the impact to the water supply for the wetland to be, and how does that? It seems like it would be a very strange thing to do all this work to protect and replicate a wetland if we're going to remove its water supply and have it dry up in a couple of years.
Hard to believe. Okay, I guess I'd be curious the water's going to go somewhere. And it's not clear to me that it's all from bubbling over as opposed to it's just part of the groundwater flow in that area and the seepage. I guess I guess I always had the problem when we were doing the project of whether that isolated wetland was just formed because they had that little well house versus that there's just high groundwater around there from stuff. So it was never clear to me that that well house was a critical part in the fact that that wetland existed. So I guess that's related to your thing. I guess I'm a little less concerned that somehow it's gonna deprive the wetlands of its water, because I think the wetlands are still wet there, and I don't think that well has overflowed per se. I don't know how far down, when's the last time you were there, Deshang, and what water level? Did you actually see it overflow, or did it actually, it's just a,
Yeah, the first time I worked there is in the springtime, 2 years ago, or maybe. So the water is right. So they have a 4-inch overflow contours coming out of the side. It's roughly 2 feet down from the rim, which is almost like at the ground level. So the water was seeping out there. So the water was like about 10 feet deep, from 2 feet down from the top of the rim. The rim standing up like about 2 feet above the ground. So, and there is like a 4-inch overflow pipe. So it was coming out. So it was kind of interesting. That's what
but that was only 2 feet down from the top, from the surface was the overflow pipe.
Yes, so the well is not like in flash with the ground. So there's like a standing. So in a way, maybe when I say 12 feet, it's 12 feet from the top. It's probably about 10 feet from the ground level. And so whenever they arrive to the water rise up to the ground level, then there's that 4-inch overflow pipe on the side of the well, which flows out toward the isolated wetlands. That's what I observed.
Right, but
It's coming
we don't know
down.
how active, we don't know, I guess we don't know how continuously it's overflowing there.
Definitely not in the summer. So in the summer.
Have you been there recently to see the water level?
No, I haven't been there in the past, 6 months, 7 months, but not probably 6, 7. When was the last time? Probably early this year when I was.
Okay, that's all right. You don't have to explain. I think it might be useful for us to, since there's been a lot of rain, to go look at it and see whether it's really overflowing or whether it's just there and we still have moisture in that isolated wetland, just to go study the existing conditions now. Maybe, I guess, as I see it, I guess we have to be clear about what it is that, if there's any flexibility within the well from the Board of Health about how this is classified and how it has to be filled in, whether we're just have no choice, that it has to be. I guess I'd like to know whether you find out from the Board of Health whether there's no flexibility whatsoever and what exactly is the procedure for something as large as this. And then we have to go have a site visit, or Joyce has to go out with you and figure out how you're going to get access if it has to be done, so that we could figure out how it would be done and then check on the access issue, whether it come all the way around from the top. I don't know whether there's easier ways to come all the way around from the top side, for example. But I guess for the sake of where we are now, is this is this holding up anything at the moment, so we can have a site, so you can get more information or whatever, and we could bring it, come back at the next meeting?
No, I mean, I agree that we should get some clarification. So I was kind of saying, well, I have no control. I guess the Board of Health have to dictate it. That's why I did digging into it, but I fully understand the commission's so what you are requesting for makes sense, and I would be curious too. So I have never really get involved with the commission well, but I know general, either they grounded or,
Okay, so why don't you get, I mean, the first well, I
So the
don't
Board
think
of,
it's an issue. Yeah,
so the Board of Health is gonna, as Brian said, the Board of Health will dictate how it's done. My concern, my only comment and concern was access, and
I
I
agree.
just would hate to see the back well house, the shallow well filled with concrete. I've seen them filled up with the bentonite for the pipes, because I think that's easier to get down. But I wouldn't want to see, if it could be filled with sand and then properly capped, that would be fine. But I think if Deshane goes back and finds whoever the well person is that's going to decommission and find out what the process is, I think that would help us.
Sure, okay, whether it's the Board of Health or the well capper. We need to know what it would be for something of this magnitude and what the options are, whether there is any flexibility as to how it's done. And then you'd have to go talk with Joyce about access. Once you learn about what has to be done, or maybe that there's some flexibility as to what's put there. As to the house thing, obviously that's a benefit to all, to have less impervious surface and be a little further from the wetland. So why don't we just bring this up at the next meeting and you get more information, and we'll put it on our agenda for the next meeting. Does that seem reasonable to everybody?
Yep.
Yes.
Any other further comments from anybody? Just speak up, since I can't see everybody right away. Okay. Let's move on to thank you, Deshane.
okay, when will be the next meeting? So.
Next meeting is the first one in September, which is September 7th.
I will contact Mark, and so trying to get the two answers, so how they will do it. and
Or as
then-
Joyce said, you might have to just literally talk to the well person. If Mark does, maybe Mark doesn't have that specifics other than the well capper, well digger capper person.
Right, yeah, I will find out what the machine, and then after I know what the size of machine they have to get there.
Yeah,
then I
and
can-
obviously, you know, the issues about whether, as Joyce said, whether it'd be a lot nicer to have something
That's marked
that
up.
is pervious, like in terms of sand, and just figure out how you can cap the top and make it a little less intrusive as to what's put in there to fill it. Besides, I've been told the specific person besides a well capper is a Massachusetts licensed well driller. Yeah, but whether there's something that's a little bit more accommodating to these wetland issues, then as Joyce said, a 3-foot by 12-foot plug of cement. It would be preferable to have something else. Okay.
Okay, will do. I will do my best to get the information over. I cannot
And
make
talk
the
with
decision.
Joyce along the way so we could get it.
Yeah, I will keep Joyce posted, and if things is done, maybe I will get there trying to find a pass after I know what the
And we
machine.
can find the access thing, and if Joyce, you feel needs to have a site visit, you can see if
out.
people want to join you to go
Okay.
look at an access issue.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome.
We're going to be
Okay, thank
moving
you.
on here.
Yeah, thank you. Close that. Share.
Yes. Then we also have here a site issues, the certificate of completion for 29 Bear Hill Road. What are the issues there?
You need to continue.
So,
Yeah, I guess I could continue again. Okay. I was gonna sort of, since we're already late, I was gonna try to squeeze it in, but I'll, before you do, I am going to reopen the regs hearing at 7:47. And I'm gonna move to, let's see, what else do we have? We have a few other little, I don't know what other agenda items, actually, I have to go see whether, I'll move the hearing. Oh yeah, I'll move the hearing until 8 o'clock. Do I have a second?
Second,
Any further discussion? Roll call vote, Michael, I, Courtney,
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
Jacob,
I
Carol,
I,
Matt.
Aye.
Okay. Okay. COC for Vale Hill Road. What's going on?
So, I'm gonna share my screen very quickly. I have just two issues out here. It looks very nice. They did a great job. But there's two small issues. You can see my screen.
Yes.
So this is where the two trees were planted. This right here is where the driveway is. For some reason, my pictures aren't all coming out, but they were supposed to stop mowing this section of the lawn here. Are you able to, can you still see my screen?
Yes.
yes.
All right, so this has been maintained. They put the two trees in, if you recall, before they did the septic, and they look good. They're great looking trees. But the idea was that this area would be abandoned, but they have mowed it. They've got the bounds that go all along the top, and then they haven't mowed the slope. They did do some stabilization with boulders, but as you can see, the grass is coming up through, and that looks great. So this all looks just like we had talked about. The slope is probably a little bit steeper, but that's okay. Maybe they just did some less grading and didn't, take down as many trees. And then the other issue is, I don't have this picture. This is a downspout. It's in a pretty planter. It goes through the pretty planter, and this goes back to the house corner. So what they did was they put the downspout underground, ran it through this pretty planter, which has a pretty plant on top. And as I went through, I went, oh, what a nice place to have a plant. It's right it's right on this side of the rock. It just sits right over here at the back side. So it lines up with this stone wall. And it's a gutter that's a downspout that has been directed right to the edge of the grading. Now, they put up splash pad and they've got some rocks there. And I think they would have a problem if we said you take it out, because where the downspout comes down is lower than the ground between the wetlands and the house. So it would trap water right there at the this is the high point here. There's a walkway along the garage, so it would trap water. But on the other hand, it's also a direct outlet to the wetlands. So those are the only two issues I have. One is that they did not abandon the lawn. The idea was to leave it undisturbed or unmaintained where the trees are. And then there's a gutter here. Downspout, a drain from the downspout.
Could you maybe pull up the plot plan and show us where that gutter is? I was unclear about how close to the house that is.
While she's doing that, is it as simple as they need to stop mowing that area and maybe they need to put a monument there?
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So here's the septic system. There's a downspout right here. And it kind of shows up. I don't see it labeled, but it looks like it's collecting. It looks like it's going right here. He actually did show it on his plan. He didn't label it, but that's where it is right there.
Do we know if it's new versus old?
It's new pipe. Now, I don't know what was there before. This grading wasn't here before, if you recall. This was there wasn't this type of grading. This was all, it was a low spot adjacent to the yard, so there would not have been this need.
Okay.
Joyce, would you prefer to see it, or should we prefer to see it just pulled back, I don't know, 5 feet or something from the wetland? So, because there seems to be enough grade that wherever it surfaces from underground could still potentially be an okay place.
So the nice thing that they did for this, was that they put a little splash pad and then they have some boulders behind it. We really couldn't, without them having to change the grade, they really can't pull it back because it's the grading that's adjacent to the septic system. So the only other thing they could do, and it'd be horrible, and I don't know how it would work, is that because this one here, where this downspout is, they could never get the water out the back if we said you can't do what you've got done here. So the advantage is it's clean water, it's roof water, it's not like a garage drain. I just called it out because it's different. Now I don't know why they put it in a plant pot. I don't know if they were trying. I don't know. It's not really disguised except from the front. And they did the right things for the outfall, the things that we would require if we had an outfall.
Is it really different as opposed to, look, it was on the original plan? Is it,
Was
is
it on the
something,
original?
as you say, I'm looking at the plan and I'm looking at one of the plans that was in the folder and it shows it there.
Hold on, I'm bringing up.
Well, I guess more practical question is, how does it look right now? I mean, it didn't look
So
like.
you know something? Now that Michael said that, it is shown.
In a sense, we sort of approved it because we didn't notice.
Yeah, we did that. I
We-
did not notice it. I had looked at another version and I had not seen that. But now that Michael says that, it's actually right here. And it's actually labeled. So never
Right.
mind.
I mean, I'm looking-
We called it out.
And
And
I mean, I agree that the issue of if we feel like there's enough erosion control at the end of it, I'm sort of leaning towards, I don't think there's much to do about that part because
Oh, no, there isn't. They did more than we even knew about. So because they put the little splash pad there.
Yeah, I mean, we had flash floods recently, so I think if anything was unstable or causing an issue, you would have seen evidence of that.
when did you go visit it, Joyce? When was that?
Oh, no, I saw it today, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, and you didn't see
And
any
the-
signs of erosion coming out from that?
No, I can see where
Okay.
there's water coming out, but it's not washed out.
I guess as to Courtney's point, I guess it works.
So again, on this plan, as you see that they were going to revise the mow line here to not have this area mowed. So that's my only outstanding thing. And the house is on the market, and right now, it's not like you would do something over here. I don't know what you would utilize this
Well,
for,
is it
but
Is it as simple as just telling them to stop mowing there and put
Stop
up a
mowing?
monument? And then when they put up a monument there or something, or some boulders there to stop them from doing it, and
It's-
let it go.
It's
And
probably, I mean, the thing to do is probably to put a few stakes and some string there so that whoever's mowing the lawn remembers not to go on the other side and leave it that way for a couple of weeks, and that might be enough.
yeah, although at this point, given transgression,
Right, yeah.
I almost feel like they should just put up whether we can ask them if they'll put up something there and as well as the string and rope so that if they want to get a certificate of compliance soon, I think we need to see some sign that some way of convincing us that that area will not be managed anymore.
Roll some of those rocks and boulders over there, just
Right,
so it's, you don't drive over it with a mower, you know?
right.
I mean, keep in mind too that everything is all finished and landscaped, and they don't have a machine there to move things around.
Oh,
Well, they have to.
I can reach out. I'll reach out to them and see what they might be agreeable to doing.
Right. Okay, so we'll just put this on our next
Right.
agenda. Put it on the next agenda and hopefully something will happen by then. Okay. Anything more on that? Then in terms of other agenda items before 8, well, we tend to 2 things there. Do you have any other side?
You've got a warrant. You got 2 things on the warrant.
Right, I saw there's 2 warrants and they are only for postage. And then for a newspaper advertisement. Which I'm not, what was the newspaper advertisement for?
It was for the regulations.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that was our hearing. Fine, so that was the other, the expenses were like $6 or $8 each, and then there was, I think, the $60 or $80 for our hearing announcement. Okay, so we've done the warrant. Are there any other site issues?
No, Deborah brought up something today, that there is, the paper has a new procedure for advertising. They want to be paid in advance. So it just so happens this week we have 3 weeks in advance of a hearing. So we did have a new notice of intent filed and the procedure is in place. Deborah, if you want to give a quick update on that.
Yeah, that was for the land on Hunting Lane, which we had reviewed about, I don't know, 4 months ago. From a
Right, but how the paper's handling things now.
Oh, well, basically the way they're handling it, they still want the applicant owner's authorization sheet, but on that authorization sheet for legal notice expense, they want to include the applicant's address and email. So as soon as they get the legal notice from me, as we did today, they're immediately going to call the applicant or owner and get that invoice paid immediately before they advertise. So that might change the dynamics a little bit, but and what I asked is, you know, they did provide me with the proof. The proof was fine. We agreed it would be on next Thursday's publication, provided that payment is made. And they just, I said, well, can you at least email me as soon as you do get payment? And they said, you know, they would do that.
So we run the risk that if the applicant doesn't pay promptly for whatever reason, whether they just can't be reached or something else, the notification won't be in the paper in time. And it's a tight window. Forgetting, whereas in the past, they would just do it and then they would invoice later.
Right.
So people have to be aware
So I
that
think,
they have to do something,
yep,
prepared to do something very quickly. It's almost, maybe we have to change our form where people have to be prepared to pay almost upfront or something. Is there some way to? What do you think?
well, we can't, so they're billed directly. It's not like we collect the money and they pay it, but what will happen is, what we will do when someone files is make them very clear that the paper's going to be contacting them, who do they want to be contacted, and who's going to pay it. Because if they don't do it in time, they won't be on whatever the next meeting is.
Okay,
Well-
so that should be all put on the form. I am not only
It can be,
talking to them, but I guess why don't we revise the form to let them know exactly all of this stuff in writing, so that when they're filling out the form, they've been duly notified. And let's see how it goes. If it becomes a problem of reaching people or too tight, and see if we can work something out with the paper. I'm not quite sure what it is on their cash flow. Because I don't want to get the town involved in paying for it and then collecting money from the applicant, even though we could force that too. But I don't know whether we are set up for that, but whether
Well,
we-
I think it would be more probable to have perhaps the representative pay the fee and straighten it out then with the owner.
oh yeah, they'll have to do it. I mean, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah,
I mean, there's obviously more convoluted things. We could just put $100 on it, since each thing is less than $100.
yeah, it's
Just put
usually
$100 on
70.
deposit with the paper and say, fine, if you ever have it, you could take it out of this, and then people would reimburse the town, but we want to avoid that. Let's see how it goes. Inform everybody and we'll see how that goes. And whether we have any snafus. And that could be meaning that the paper doesn't give people much time to do it. They can make one call on a one day, and if they don't happen to get that one person, then all of a sudden they lose their spot. So it could be also the way the paper handles it.
Well, I'll get the word out to you folks because, again, they said it could be tomorrow and they'd send me an email. So I certainly will let everybody know.
Okay, well, keep on it and see how it goes, and whether we have any problems. Okay, is there anything else on, okay, the only last item before we get to the regs thing, even though we have to start that, is, in our, oh geez. In our next meeting, okay. We'll have to prepare some comments on the Farm Road homes for the next meeting. And so Joyce, prepare like a project, a sort of summary for that, for the next meeting, and then we'll talk about what we might want to make comments to the ZBA and see what we work with the peer review if we need that. Because the next meeting is going to be on traffic stuff and others. So the wet and the stormwater is going to probably be the one after that. And then we can either, so we have some time to do it, but at our next meeting, we should start thinking through what kind of issues we have and what conditions we might want or problems on the next meeting agenda. Brian, do you have a comment about that?
Hi, Brian Moore, 49 Farm Road. Thank you for recognizing me. I'm trying to manipulate this little tiny window of options. Thank you. My question was procedural, Michael. The property, several properties next to us have open orders of conditions. And the orders of conditions were issued for notices of intent related, and in your own minutes reflect certain understandings related to the type of development. And at what point does the applicant for the 40B, are they obligated to, number one, file a whole new order of intent with a whole new order of conditions, and number two, does that really get adjudicated at this board, or is the ZBA enforce just the State Wetlands Protection Act for the purposes of the 40B application? And thank you.
Yeah. The ZBA will only be acting on our behalf with regard to the Sherborn bylaw and the Sherborn wetland regulations, and whether there's anything more stringent that we have beyond the State Wetland Protection Act. That will be adjudicated through the ZBA comprehensive permit process, so that to the extent that we have comments that arise from our bylaw, that's where we would argue them. in front of the ZBA. They will, it's a separate process where they have to file under the Wetlands Protection Act with us for this project. And that would come before us as a regular, whether it's an RDA or an NOI, depends what the project looks like. Since at the state level, there are different rules as to whether any of the wells are in jurisdiction at the state level, or whether it's just purely stormwater issues. And the stormwater details, which are probably the most important in dealing with flood management and flood control, are going to be before the ZBA and with the peer review. So that's part of the ZBA, is all of the flood control and land subject to flooding and the capacity and all of that kind of stuff is what I think we're going to have to work with the ZBA on the stormwater standards. But anything under other stuff, so it's not clear what stormwater they're going to have that would, and what other, the way the project falls out, that what'll come before us under the State Wetland Protection Act. So that remains to be seen what they will do before us. But we're going to still look at it as if it's a project before us now under the bylaw, and see what conditions or concerns we have and raise it at the ZBA. Probably September meeting. It'll probably be, whether it's maybe in the October meeting when they're doing stormwater or something like that. I think where we can ask for our turn and be prepared to present then.
So just to, I'm sorry, it's a little confusing. So the town, your commission oversees the implementation of the state WPA for the state portion of the 40B, but the town bylaw portion of WPA is adjudicated by the ZBA, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments on that before we
I have
move?
comments, but I'm done.
Can I ask a question about the other half of Brian's question? You were mentioning open orders of conditions. Were those all for neighboring properties and not the one in question, or not the ones in question?
There's existing open order of conditions on both the existing 65 parcel and 53 Farm Road. 53 Farm Road is in the process of being constructed and is like 75% done, but 65 Farm Road has an open order of conditions. During the hearings for those order of conditions, it was presented to the board that the reason for installing wells was for single family residences, and several members of the board were adamant that the only reason that they issued the NOI, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but they were concerned that they were going to be issuing approval for single family homes, and the applicant would then come back with a larger project, which is what has happened. So my concern was about an existing order of conditions for single family homes when the applicant is not applying at this point for single family homes.
Right, we'll see how they pursue that. If they put in another application and the other application becomes moot because they've changed their plans and it's a project under a 40B, so that I don't know what the actual process is for basically saying that they're not following through on that project and they're submitting.
Wouldn't the applicant's significant deviation from an existing order condition?
They haven't followed, they haven't done anything they haven't acted under the existing order on that lot. They haven't done any activity under that order of conditions. He could basically just say that he's no longer pursuing that project and resubmit under this 40B process where it's under the state, because he hasn't done
activity. For 12 months, he's positioned this as a 40B in front of the town.
I know, but essentially he hasn't acted on the existing order of conditions. And
But it's asinine that the commission just rolls over every time he shows up at your board.
That's a very, I take offense at that kind of language, to be honest with you. I don't think the.
I'm
only us
sorry,
rolling
Michael, but
over.
it's true.
No, rolling over on what? I think that basically they haven't done any activity on that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because we have our other business, but that's not I don't think that's an appropriate way of describing what's going on because he hasn't acted on it and done anything with it. In fact, I don't think he's going to do even half that, the wells that he has there. He's going to do them in different places so that in this essence, his current proposal will basically, with his current proposal and what he has to submit, it's as if the other one didn't even exist. It doesn't have to do anything and he hasn't acted on it.
Then you should maybe eliminate your approval of the other one entirely.
That's not the way the rules work, and you can read them yourself, but that's not the way it works.
The
That's
very
the
first
applicant's
line
choice.
of the WAP form says that any deviation should be construed.
He hasn't deviated because he hasn't done anything.
Michael, I thought that he has, I mean, haven't we seen, I thought he had come
Enough?
before the board. Can you explain what the status is with that development? I mean, we've certainly seen plans and all sorts of things. So what is the status?
He hasn't put a shovel in the ground in our jurisdiction. He
But
hasn't.
has he, I thought did he submit to the state? If somebody could summarize what the status of the 40B, I'd appreciate it. I should have paid more attention.
He
to this.
submitted a comprehensive permit, which the hearing process has started with the ZBA.
So that means he has submitted the comprehensive permit for the 40B.
It's
on that
already
property.
it's already opened. It opened the list. I
But
announced
why
it to
doesn't,
everybody.
I don't understand why that doesn't actually signal a change of use. It's been submitted. Why are you saying it hasn't
There's
been?
no
submitted?
such thing as a change of use here. It's a completely separate process. When there's a 40B on Coolidge, we weren't beating down their door to say, you must submit your NOI now, you've changed the use. He has an open order of conditions to do one thing. And so if he gets approval from the ZBA to do something else, he still has to file a new permit with us.
Are we sure that that's the case? Have we checked with, legal counsel because
Yes,
he
that's
does?
the case. We know it's the case. And if he could get rejected, he could change his mind tomorrow and go
Right.
back to doing single family homes if he wanted to. We have no basis to act on something when there's no physical activity on the site of Benstead. And he's basically going through another permitting process that he's more than able to do, more than one permitting process at a time, if he's not actually doing stuff there.
When you say physical activity, though, I mean, typically, even in a 40B process, right, it goes through the ZBA and then at some point it comes back to Concom specifically related to the wetlands.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that usually happens before, I mean, it might be when they're digging test pits or something, but that usually doesn't relate to physical activity that I can recall. It usually is
Test
them-
pictures of physical activity. That's to me is a physical activity.
So
What's it-
I mean, what are you looking for, Carol? Like, so
I
he
think
has
it,
a
I
per-
think it would be super helpful because, the Moores as a butters have raised this question more than once. It would be really clear exactly what the process is, exactly what will trigger a review, and also what our legal rights and obligations are. That's all. I think we should
Carol,
be.
I think we've been very clear about the process. It's the same as, the Coolidge 40B and numerous other 40Bs. I mean, unless he goes and starts digging wells and acting upon the order of conditions that's currently open, he's not doing anything with that.
Well,
If
it
he's
is different though.
another-
Don't forget that at Coolidge,
I
they didn't
didn't-
have a previous
Yeah.
order of conditions.
Okay, I'm gonna stop. Mary, did you have a comment to make?
Sorry, Michael. Yes, I did. And I think this may be relevant. When you guys issued the order of conditions for the 3 private single-family home drinking wells, there was also some discussion about mowing and maintaining that property. And I'm just curious if that's something that is still, an area that you're concerned about. I remember Gene Bednar had raised a couple of issues about, annual mowing, and it doesn't seem like anything's happened over there in a while. So I'm just curious if that's still within your purview. And then the other comment I would just make briefly is that there was additional activity on the land where he did additional, I don't know if I'm using the right words, but there was additional digging and test pits done for stormwater exploration as
Correct.
part of the NOI. So it was related to the 40B project in as much as he was looking for
Right.
options around stormwater management.
Correct. He did do that. That wasn't related to the NOI, and he filed an AA with us, and Joyce checked it out, and they were working outside of our jurisdiction. So that was, you know, they're perfectly within their rights to do that kind of stuff outside of our jurisdiction. You know, anytime anything he's going to propose, he has an approval to put in whatever wells in whatever locations that we approved. If he wants to do anything different than that in our jurisdiction, then that's going to require, you know, a permitting procedure of some sort.
Okay, but I would like to understand about the mowing, just because I know that was a
Yeah,
issue that
think
had been raised
that's a good
previously, and I
question.
don't know if you guys have an answer, but at some point I'd love to understand what that is.
We'll go look at whether there's any issue of mowing that should have been done along the way. Usually it's something that happens after the fact, so Joyce, you can go look at that mowing issue and stuff like that there. Do you have anything new to add, Brian, before I move on? Because we have a schedule here, and I'm not sure we could talk about this more. You're muted, so you're muted. And maybe best to talk about it at the meeting, at our next meeting, it might be the best time to continue this kind of talk.
I'm just saying, number one, I was not trying to mischaracterize the commission's work, but I do remember that we had a very, very vigorous conversation during the approval process for that NOI, where the chair and other members of the Conservation Commission were adamant that it was for single family homes only. And
Nobody's disagreeing with that.
This whole concept of, you know, multiple parcel development, part of sequential development, was very, very in the front and center. And by simply waiting, it seems like we've forgotten that we were arguing about this 16 months ago, 18 months ago, about what sequential
You're
development
repeating the
is.
same thing before, and I'm gonna end up saying the same thing, which is not going to be very useful here, give a good use of all of our time. We'll probably rehearse, we'll probably go over this again at our next meeting when we talk about this. But in the end, there's nothing we can do. We're waiting to see what they file, and and until he does some stuff there that's out of compliance, he has every right to have that open order at this point. And we just have to see whether he does anything that's not in compliance with his order and see what he files next with the project. I mean, we already see what he's filed, and we will respond appropriately through the ZBA comprehensive permit process. I don't think there's anything more we can do as a regulatory entity in our role here. So I guess, sorry if I sound a little frustrated, but I feel like I'm just repeating myself. And if we try to work with people on what this is, and we're trying to do our job well, and we're careful about how we do it, no matter who the applicant is. So that's why I reacted before. I don't appreciate the use of the terms of rollover. That doesn't help the conversation at all. Okay, moving on. I don't think we have anything else on the agenda. Are there any administrative approvals?
No, I mean, there are, but I'll give you a list for the next meeting.
Okay, fine. Okay, I'm not going to move to reopen the hearing. A little late, obviously, on the regs now. Let's see now. I'm going to share my screen.
Michael, can I take a minute break? I need to run to my car and grab my notes.
By all means, that sounds very useful. Let me get here. Where are we here? What's happened here? Oh, I got too many things open here. Hold on. Okay. Let's go through and see what level of magnification works for folks. How
That's fine.
legible is this?
That works.
Readable, I mean. Should I make it bigger? I'm not hearing anything.
I can see it fine.
Okay. I see that Matt is back. Okay, this is the file that I had sent out to everybody a few weeks, I guess, a couple weeks ago, and asked everybody to review it independently. I received comments from a couple of people. And many of those have been included here as track edits. And what I would suggest is a process. I'm going to try to see what other comments people have. I really don't want to go through line by line. We'll do some general things, but I'd like to create a new version that I would see what the highlights are. And then I would like to, whatever we come up with tonight, I would like to circulate to our consultant, Matt Byrne, with some issues that I think will be outstanding and get his sort of quick look at this before we consider that, and then see what comments he has before we declare this ready to be part of our draft for the next set of hearings. There's still other changes we have to go review, but at least this part of this stuff I still need to look at here. But let's just take a walk through this thing here and see what thoughts people have on this. Matt, I guess I got comments from Carol, which I incorporated in a couple places here. I got comments from Jacob and Courtney was part of reviewing that. And so it's a matter of whether I didn't get anything explicitly from Steve and Matt. If along the way you guys want to, whether you have things to add here, pipe up, just speak up whenever you have something to wherever we're looking at here.
Okay.
On the first page, there was some just to generalize that ecological services weren't the only particular qualifications here to provide evidence, depending on what it is. And we cleaned up the wording there to make it a relevant area and accepted by the commission, just to clean up that kind of process that I think makes the definition work better. Structure, I didn't get a chance. I forgot that somebody pointed out that Jacob pointed out that we already have a structures definition, and whether we're going to revise it. And anything, this is here, anything in a fixed location. Whereas the other definition here is for occupancy, shelter, use. And then, but not limited to. I don't know whether to add in the concept of anything built in a fixed location, whether we should just combine the two. We don't have to list all the same. We can.
I don't think we need to list anything, but if I look through those two definitions, the big one that stuck out to me as being different would be stone walls wouldn't be covered under our new definition, because that doesn't meet the occupancy, shelter, or use They tend to be
It
just
does
be
fit
scattered.
anything in a fixed location.
Yeah, that's the old, in the old definition.
That's the only question, is whether we want to include that concept. That's basically a new angle that we had before, and whether part of me wants to just build it in. We could actually maybe just add it. I don't know whether a simple thing is to just add. Whether to just add it in there, even if it becomes redundant. People have comments about adding in this concept about anything in a fixed location, and whether to just add it as another sentence.
So if you do fixed location, does that mean that like a temporary force electric fencing doesn't count? Or the dog fence, you're okay with it going up to that's exempt? What are you thinking?
I guess, I don't know, a dog fence. I guess I would probably not. Doesn't mean that you can't do it. We're just defining structures. I guess whether we always have some leeway to allow things, but I don't think I guess dog fence might fit underneath it, and we'd have to permit it and decide whether whether that's and maybe a dog fence would fall under a structure. I don't mind that, maybe.
Well, maybe it doesn't. I was just wondering, if you stay with the existing definition and go fixed location, does that mean temporary things are exempt?
I wasn't going to go with this one. I was going to add it in. I wanted to keep the one we have. I mean, the new one that we have. And to me, it's just a matter of whether we add in the existing one, expanding it basically. Such as we could add another sentence that said, structures could also include anything built in a fixed location. And maybe shorten it to include things like wooden fences and whatever. But or just even do period, anything built in a fixed location. And just add that sentence of that phrase, that sentence. What are you going to say, Carol?
I'm looking at anything built in a fixed location, and then also materials and/or objects that range or constructed for permanent or temporary occupancy, shelter, or use. And I guess I feel like the one above, materials or etc., is more inclusive. And I can understand maybe you want to throw in some more things into that list, but I'm not sure that it adds anything, because the idea of the second one is that it's built in a fixed location, but the first one does say arranged or constructed, and that says for permanent or temporary occupancy, shelter, or use. So it's a pretty inclusive language, I think.
Okay.
Would we run into trouble for including all of the temporary things? Because
We're just defining the structure. We're not saying for sure whether you can or cannot, whether you can or cannot do it.
Well, that will come later in this document.
Right. I mean, we'll say, but I think we always have leeway in the document to say that we can permit certain things despite this. I mean, the temporary is an interesting issue. I mean, this came, I guess, originally came from Matt. I think that I guess the question is whether you err on the side of it being quite broad, and we can always back off on a given permit, versus the fact that if you're not broad enough, whether unexpected items come up and you're like, wow, that doesn't fit in here, and somebody's able to do something that we don't think is appropriate for wetland protection. I'd rather err on the side, and again, it comes back to trusting the discretion of this commission to be reasonable versus the fact that we miss things that turn out to be unreasonable to allow. So I guess there's a lot of discretion. There's a bit of discretion in a lot of things, in a number of things in the regulations that rely on us being acting appropriately. But yeah, so I'm not sure what a temporary use would be, or I mean, if somebody wanted to put up a big tent and it goes over into the woods or who knows what, or something like that, that I'm not sure we would want something like that. Depends how long temporary is. So therefore, I don't mind having it there to make sure certain things don't happen, because things can be left for quite a while and be considered temporary.
I agree with that, Michael.
So the question is whether nobody's questioned whether that definition, we could add some more things, and the only question is whether anything built in a fixed location is already covered. Is there anything that we're missing if we don't, whether we just expand? It says not limited to, and the only thing is whether stone walls, because right, people can make fairly significant stone walls. I would probably add it in here, even though for the most part, it is a structure, but we generally would regulate new structures. Existing stone walls are not something we're going to make a comment on. This is when somebody's constructing something new, but I could see a fence. It could be even here, a fence.
Michael, I think it's good to include stone wall. I mean,
That's all right.
maybe
I'm
there's
putting
no
it in.
argument about that, because people do put up pretty fancy stone walls also.
Right. I mean, I don't know if we need to add in a tennis court, or I guess, or whether we should just add everything that's there.
Well, I don't think we should copy the existing definition, the existing list entirely, because, for example, it lists wooden fences, but not other fences.
Oh yeah, no, I'm putting in the new stuff here.
Yeah, okay.
Tennis courts. I guess it's all single. Tennis court.
I don't think it's necessary to list every conceivable.
We're not doing it all. I can't tell whether to just put in what was already there.
Yeah, I mean, the but not limited to gives us a lot of leeway.
Yeah. Tunnel, culvert. Culvert's a sort of special thing. Yes, I'd like to think, but it helps people understand that what we're considering. I guess I would probably still even put in a driveway, since that's just so that it's clear to people. Bridge, building. I'll add it up here. We have shed somewhere. Do we have shed?
We have building, so.
I guess I think we should put in shed so it's clearer to people. Shed, house, we got bridge, culvert, driveway, stone, okay, we've got it all. Okay, I'm gonna delete this thing here. And get rid of that. Moving on. We cleaned up some of the definitions that are already there about clarifying about no buffer zone for riverfront. The question for you, Matt. That's the existing definition says the no alteration zone is presumptively the new inner buffer zone. What does presumptively mean in a context like this? Anything particular legally?
Can you show me again what you're talking about?
Right here.
Can you possibly make that any bigger?
Of course.
I'm like going blind over here.
No. You weren't here, I guess, when I asked everybody if I should make it bigger. So you missed that. Is this making you less blind? I can go.
I mean, I think just it means what it means. I mean, presumably, presumptively. That's how I read it.
So it's useful to keep in.
It doesn't. Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, versus just saying no alteration zone is the inner buffer zone.
I mean, that's what it is. I mean, I think you could take it out, actually, because it is by definition, it is the inner buffer zone. It's not presumptively at all.
He asked the right question, Michael.
Right. The portion is, I guess you have to make it a sentence. Or I just make it a sentence. It'll be a little different style than some others. Okay. Okay, moving on.
Can I ask a question before we move on?
Oh,
Did we-
sure.
Did we come to a consensus on keeping the inner buffer zone as a distinct thing from just the buffer zone?
Yes. You'll see when we get to the performance standards that we have different performance standards for the inner buffer zone.
Okay, I don't think I'm convinced on that yet, but anyways, that's okay.
Okay, oh, okay, well, you'll see the differences. There are not a lot of differences. It's almost, well, you'll see how it's dealt with in the draft here. There's just a few edits here that were done for 5.2.1, the preamble. I don't know of any new edits to this. This has been looked at a few times. I'm gonna move on. Definition. This is just the same definition we've had before of it. I mean, it's sort of redundant to what is elsewhere, but it sort of states the case. And we were trying to figure out how to deal with cross-referencing. A general issue is how to cross-reference things that are at the state level and in our regs, since our regs are going to get renumbered as part of a program across all towns to renumber their regulatory regulations.
The question I had there about references to the state regulations is whether we should worry about them getting renumbered and thus losing their meaning. With our own regulations, we don't have that problem. We just have to get the references right.
Yeah, no, in the state way. Well, okay, I was still trying to do it so that it might minimize all of our redoing. Yes. Yeah, I guess this has to be riverfront as identified in. I guess we don't have to make a state reference here. I mean, for the riverfront is defined in enough places elsewhere that we don't need to make a reference.
Michael?
Yeah.
I did do a little bit of research to try to get at this whole question of like undisturbed.
That comes up later.
I know, but let me bring it up now, because what was interesting is that when I did the research, it mostly was not defined, but it was interesting to me that other states and jurisdictions actually define a buffer zone. And I'm gonna, if you'll let me, I'll read a couple sentences from the Minnesota Stormwater Manual, because I think it's kind of relevant. It might actually help us also with this question of how to talk about undisturbed. Just as an example, so the Minnesota Stormwater Manual says a buffer zone is natural undisturbed area that borders a body of water with the objective of protecting and enhancing water quality and habitat by restricting construction activities and maintaining existing vegetation. The buffer includes the vegetation, exposed rock, or barren ground that exists prior to commencement of earth disturbing activities. Buffer zones are sometimes called riparian buffers. And I was interested to see, like, I sent this to just before the meeting, so it's.
I read it. I have a specific comment on that I think those definitions, that is a different way of defining and configuring the buffer zone. In our regulations in the state, the buffer zone is defined as a physical location. It is the 100 feet or whatever distance you have of a wetland resource. In the definition you read and the others, they're defining it by function and quality and characteristics. That buffer zone could ebb and flow in terms of size based on that definition, whereas we have a definition that's based on a physical measurement, independent of what is there and what it's functioning as.
But the
So I see that
positive
as a
of those
difference.
definitions is that they do make a reference to the idea that it's typically natural vegetated and natural
Oh,
and
sure, of
vegetated
course.
area.
I mean, we have things in our standards where you're trying to say maintain a vegetated area of at least 50 feet or 100 feet or something. I think that's in line with what we do talk about, what we want to see in our buffer zone. But those definitions don't work for the way we're defining it as a physical distance, if that makes any sense to you or people.
Yeah, I guess I'm suggesting that maybe we could introduce here in this where it says it's a jurisdictional resource area, that we could, this like typically natural vegetation, like we can qualify this to make it clear. I do understand what you're saying, that's also a physical measurement of area. But what I liked about some of those other ones is they do talk a little bit more about how it relates to the function and bring up this idea of that it's a natural vegetated area.
Or that we want it to be.
Right, right.
It often isn't. I mean, I don't want that, that's a new thing to introduce that we can write up, but I would say that then you can draft something that you might be an addition that we could talk about. I think I don't want to wordsmith that kind of addition.
Okay,
I don't think that's a good use of our time as a group.
I can
If we
write something up.
and whether, I mean, the definition, I mean, whether that's a definition is yeah, I mean, it says it in the paragraph before, just to Carol,
Yeah,
before definition, accordingly, there's talk about it's best left in an undisturbed and naturally managed state. I mean, there already is language here, whether there's a sentence or so more that could work to do it, but I think that the concept that you're talking about is already covered in this previous paragraph, but we could always add something. And I'll just make a note here. Okay, moving on, presumptions and burden of proof. Some of this is from our existing regs, as in the part here. And a lot of this is existing text that we've seen for quite a few months. And again, here, Carol, you have to see that here on the furthermore may require continuous. So the concept is mentioned in a number of places. So I mean, we can emphasize that. But here it's just some wordsmithing that has come up and a few additions of things that weren't covered up here. I don't know if anybody else has any, who didn't make comments, has anything more to say about this part here. Without, I'm going to move on then, unless I guess here people also should read that we decided after I was talking with Jacob that we already have a section in the regs called burden of proof. And that has all of this wording here. So that in a sense, we're just referencing that rather than repeating it here. One could have a different view about repetition, but in this case, we already have it in section 3. And so, and this is section 5. So that's why this was removed. And this is something we discussed, which is, I guess, relevant to your point, Steve, about how the level of detail of what we're looking for in terms of analysis or data for us is somewhat proportional to the scale of the project. And I guess it's really, actually, this is just on the scale and the scope of the work that we might require more information on that. One of the things that we have to go back and look at, I made a note for ourselves, is that we have some information requirements in a later section that actually sets a higher threshold when you're altering more than 5,000 square feet. And I'm wondering whether we'd want to lower that number because so that we can get information that maybe even just for a few thousand square feet, we might want to be able to have the ability to require certain types of more information. So the meat of this then comes down to this 5.4.4 performance standards.
Michael, before you get there, I see that Mary has a hand up. I think that's
Oh,
you.
yeah, sure. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know if you're taking comments now. I just had a
Sure.
question about, sorry, the burden of proof.
Yeah,
So I
sure.
appreciate that the language is repeated somewhere else, and I don't have an issue with that, but I'm curious, just a clarification, if a order of conditions is issued and there's a delineation that order of conditions is based on, if there's new information that comes up, is the burden of proof moot, or does it have to come through like a new RDA or a new NOI or something like that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's a tricky issue because it came up. We brought that up with the state has assistants for each group. It's called the circuit rider. This woman who helps us. Comes down to whether the new information was not discoverable in a sense that at the time of when the delineation was set.
Okay.
And for example, I guess the only example she came up with is that somehow there was some buried conduit or connection that she think of one project that somehow wasn't at all apparent.
Yeah.
And that somehow became apparent later and had still some function.
Yeah.
And that sort of seemed a little fuzzy, seemed to open the door to some reopening of the issues. But it's not a black and white area, but for the most part, delineation is mostly set by there, and that and I don't know whether there's room for errors, what kind of errors. So it's not a clear-cut area, and I think it probably depends on what it was and the degree.
I'm just thinking, and I guess I'm sort of thinking about recent events, with flooding up in Vermont and places like that. Like if something happens that alters how things.
Yeah, unfortunately, the flooding thing, it comes down to until the new, like the flooding stuff in particular, confront the fact that the state is recognizing that, and they're changing how to do apply stormwater standards in terms of what are the rainfall amounts. And so they're right now have draft ones that they're updating it. So until those are promulgated sometime later this year, they'll be working on what might consider to be older sort of stormwater conditions that you have to build to. But that's, as usual, there's always a little bit of a lag with regulatory compliance.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious, like if the change that you're proposing takes, I think the applicant should have the burden of proof if there's new information, that comes forward.
Well, it's only if they met the regulatory standard at the time. It's like when you change building standards, like when you change any regulatory thing. If somebody comes in under the old thing, they're grandfathered.
But not if a permit hasn't been issued.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So therefore, that's a different case. So
yeah, okay.
I'm not sure that we need to change our burden of proof issue to deal with that. That's just a regulatory process.
Okay, just clarification. Thanks, Michael.
Sure. Okay, performance standards. What we've come down to, guys and gals, as the internal note here was, we've had this talk, and this is relevant to Steve's comment, of whether we have different performance standards by inner and outer buffer zone and by developed versus undeveloped buffer zone, independent of the fact that we have to figure out how to define developed and undeveloped, which we'll get some more help from. But as concepts, those two dimensions almost create four categories of place you could do performance standards. What I think we've settled on in this draft has, and just reordered it, was that we have work in developed outer buffer zone is one category. Then we have work in undeveloped outer buffer zone. And then we have work in the inner buffer zone. We don't distinguish between developed and undeveloped. The inner buffer zone is important enough because of its proximity that we have somewhat higher standards for that. So this got reorganized from the draft that was first sent out a few weeks ago, but it just moved up. It works in the progression of the less stringent area and gets to the most stringent, the inner buffer zone coming third, whereas it came first before, because it seemed like an easier flow of some things to deal with that, with how we are doing this. So the distinction is more, to your point, Steve, I think the way this draft has now, I'll walk through it, it has a little bit less stringency in developed outer buffer zone areas that are already developed and they're looking for mitigation and things like that. Then when it goes to work in currently basically undeveloped area of the outer buffer zone, it really is almost the same. I'm trying to think of what we have now. If I go down here, actually, we almost don't distinguish. Trying to think of whether we, in this draft now, because we moved up all of the instrument of demonstrating no adverse impact that we had for the inner buffer zone, we've also moved it to the outer buffer zone. So in a sense, it looks like we've
Michael, I think the only remaining difference that we landed on was this notion of we may apply a higher standard to what's significant in the inner buffer zone. But otherwise, it should be the same, except for wording where it says inner buffer zone versus undeveloped buffer zone, et cetera.
Okay, so in the end, I guess, to your point, Steve, when it's undeveloped, we were essentially not treating them too differently, except for the fact that there was this new sentence that got added here. I'm going to just highlight it for everybody to read. That the inner buffer zone is the same as the outer buffer zone when undeveloped. And except haven't quite figured out how to best word this higher threshold, the standard, to overcome the presumption of adverse impact. This is one of the two, besides how to define things, this is one of the major issues for discussion tonight, I think.
The other reason that I think it still makes sense to have an inner buffer zone that's measured by distance is because I expected in practice operationally, it's going to be hard to, in some cases, to decide whether a particular spot on the ground is developed or undeveloped, regardless of what definitions we come up with.
Yeah,
So
and
having,
right, and I think the inner buffer zone's important, because, right, that, because we're also making the distinction in case it's developed. The inner buffer zone, we don't care about, as Jacob just said, whether it's developed or not. We're gonna hold it to quite a high standard. Whereas the outer buffer zone, if it's developed, I guess is where we might still ask for these things, I guess. If I go back to the original issue here of what we have here, this is what we have for A through, actually, I moved to E because that applies to everything. Just to go over, this is what we have in developed outer buffer. The main thing is that we allow mitigate, that it's more explicit about certain kinds of mitigation that could be done.
So just to just get some clarity, so if it's undeveloped buffer zone, why would there be a lesser standard for 50 to 100 feet? I understand the argument for developed buffer zone, but can someone maybe argue that again? Why there should be a lesser threshold for, I don't know, lesser standard, I guess, for the outer buffer zone if it's undeveloped?
The question is, I'm not quite sure whether there is I guess Jacob, it comes down to this sentence here and highlighted.
yeah, I don't think there should be. I think if it's undeveloped buffer zone, it's sort of anywhere in the 100 feet, we don't want there to be much difference. The only reason for having the inner buffer zone is we don't want to have that depend on whether we decide it's developed or undeveloped or not.
Oh, yeah, right. Right, that's why, right, well, it's basically allowing a higher threshold for developed buffer zone. That basically, if it's in the inner part, we essentially want to have stricter standards. That's the reason. It's not that we're lessening the standards for the outer buffer zone when it's undeveloped. It's strengthening the standards for the inner buffer zone when it is developed. That makes sense? I just said what Jacob said in a different way.
The wording reflect that? I find it not clear, totally clear, but if it says that, that sounds good to me.
I don't know if there's a better way to say it than what we have here. I think that's what we say, but what do others think?
Michael, I guess it's okay. I can't say I feel strongly either way. I think the fact that it says no work shall generally be allowed is pretty indicative.
Yep, and we also have that for the we also have that for undeveloped outer buffer up here.
Yeah. Well, although then it also talks about exceptions. So, I mean, one thing about that I kind of like about that it's not, it just says no work will generally be allowed. I think
Right.
that's
The exceptions here are fairly minor, but right.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any comments on this highlighted sentence, or a better way to say this?
Michael, I think one thing I do understand there is something kind of odd about saying a higher standard will be applied as compared to the 50 to 100. Maybe just say something like the most stringent standards will be applied or something. So it doesn't sound quite so comparative.
I see what you mean. A high standard.
Yeah.
Question is, I'm even struggling with, I mean, these are performance standards, but I'm not sure whether we're saying that it's a higher standard. I'm not sure I even like that term, that it's like
Yeah.
a threshold or a higher, there's something missing, that, or some other noun, I think. I'm not sure. I don't know what others think about this comparative thing or not.
Can you just end it with no work shall generally be allowed?
No, I think for us to help people understand, I mean, it's
Given the closer proximity to the wetlands resource, I mean, just say like,
Yeah.
generally we're never going to allow it because it's closer to the wetlands.
um, let's see. Bring it up later. I don't know. Let's see.
The whole however part is weird.
I don't know. This is something that we draft, I guess, when Jacob and I and you were there too. We're sort of we incorporating comments in a non-quorum group, that we came up with this idea, this concept, but maybe we don't need this last sentence.
You definitely don't need the however.
Okay.
Well, let's finish this sentence first, but I want to go back to the previous sentence about all the reference to the prior section, because that's important to make sure that does what we want.
Okay. I think it's partially right. Maybe the however came because of this previous sentence.
You can say the commission may hold an applicant to a
May, not might.
Yeah. But what but it's still a higher, I guess. Is it comparative, not comparative? Is the word standard? They're all standards. So in a way, standard doesn't work to a higher presumption of no.
higher burden.
Oh yeah, burden. Oh yeah, it's a higher burden of proof, higher burden of.
I wouldn't say, I'd just say higher, well, I don't know. I wouldn't say proof because that's a legally recognized term.
Yeah.
I would just say higher.
A higher burden.
Is it the applicant or the project?
No, they're both the same. I guess we have to figure out how we do this. Higher burden in order. It's still awkward.
Michael,
Just,
what if
you
you
get-
just say no work shall generally be allowed due to the increased risk of adverse impacts given the closer proximity to the wetland resources, like lift that phrase
All right,
and then just say all the performance standards in the previous subsection apply. I think that gets across the idea of, so why will no work generally be allowed? Because we recognize the higher risk of adverse impacts because of the closer proximity to the wetland.
I mean, all right, right. I mean, it's not a higher risk we have here. The reason we don't have to, I don't want to add that because the first sentence just says, it's presumed that any alteration
Right.
will create adverse impacts. So I don't know if we even need, it's right here, it's presumed, right, I guess, it's almost like here, it's like due to its proximity. When we say it above,
Yep.
but. Um, so, I mean, because we're making reference, part of this reference here in 5.2.4 above is referencing the stuff. This is from our existing regulations. All of this red here, where we basically, to demonstrate, this is all the work, this is all of what we have in our current regulations as the issues for work in the inner buffer zone. That previously was underneath the inner buffer zone. But since we want to protect the outer buffer zone that's more undeveloped, in this draft, I moved up based on when working with Jacob and we moved up all of that stuff from the inner buffer zone, we moved it up to the outer buffer zone that's undeveloped, protect that strongly. And now we're making a back reference to all of this stuff that was what we currently have for the inner buffer zone. Then we got into this comparative thing saying that we might want all of this, but maybe due to its proximity, we might even be more stringent in applying some of these issues as to what might cause an impact if it's in the 0 to 50 versus the 50 to the 100, which gets a little at Steve's point about, do we want to even care about that?
I mean, I wonder if we really do care about that because we're basically saying that we won't allow development in the first 50. And if it's completely undisturbed all the way out to the 100, we won't allow development. So maybe in a way, this may kind of weaken or confuse it to say, well, we're actually, well, you know, we're really going to protect the inner 50 more. When in fact, I think we're trying to say, you know, we're going to protect both of them. And we'll look at the same standards for both of them.
So let's delete that last sentence. So I don't think it harms anything if that goes away.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So basically we just, all this, the highlighted part there could just go away. How do we feel about that as a group?
Fine.
Okay, Jacob?
Yeah.
Guess it's Courtney?
Yeah, do it.
What?
I said, do it. I feel like that's what Mary was suggesting.
Yeah, I know, that's what she did, right. Well, I'm just gonna, yeah, okay.
Okay.
So
Hold on. The reference to the prior section, does that actually going to do what we want as stated? Because I think should it instead say all the provisions of subsection 5242 all apply to work in the inner buffer zone? Because right now it says performance standards, and it's not obvious whether everything in there, or not to me anywhere, is whether everything in there is a performance standard.
What was your word? All the previous
provisions, all the provisions of section 5 0.2, 0.4, 0.2 also apply to work in the inner buffer zone?
Did I get it?
That, yep,
Do I need the?
I don't know.
I would say that you can say either all provisions or all of the provisions. So I think you're fine.
Okay. Now, don't forget, and this will all be subject to review again. Yeah, the only thing I want to do here is there's this list of 11 things here. I want to go against that whole parameters list that I was checklist to go against that I'm going to go do. Now, then we have these extra 4 standards here that everybody should. This one here, 5.2.4.4 is about the rare habitats and rare species. That was something that was from Matt that was listed as one of the things up above. And then it came up of, why doesn't that apply to everything? So I pulled it out, so it should apply everywhere in the buffer zone. So that's what that there. The rest are all the same things with the tricky issue here of.
Yeah, the very beginning of that one where you say notwithstanding the above standards, it's
Yeah.
ambiguous what that refers to, but otherwise it makes sense.
The above. Well, since this whole section 5.2.4 is called performance standards. That's why. I guess I could put performance, because that's what this whole section
Right,
is.
but it's not clear whether it refers to just the preceding subsection or or everything in section 5. I would rather have a label that says just list out the section numbers.
About notwithstanding all of the above performance standards,
Hmm.
trying to avoid cross references. I don't know.
Just ask a point of clarification. What you're working on right now is, I assume that you're talking about the 100-foot buffer zone there. Is that correct?
Right,
Or is
all of the above,
it's not to anywhere else in the property? That's
right. Buffer
Is that
zone
correct?
performance standard, yes.
Okay.
Even though well, yeah, because we don't have say anywhere else. I mean, I guess this is true for actually for resource areas. I wonder what we have. Well, that's probably this. Joyce, are you still there?
I am.
For this whole section here on rare whatever. I guess it all apply. I guess this reference here means that CMR 1059 applies basically to the resource area itself, I assume. I assume resource areas meet the same thing.
Well, you're saying, I mean, that that paragraph refers to natural heritage, habitat of rare or rare species, and that's got its own set of regulations under the state.
All
So
right.
you're saying that if it's it would be the burden of the applicant to meet the requirements of the Mass Endangered Species Act, and if they did that, are you saying you still wouldn't approve it?
No, I don't think that's.
I guess, are we being more strict than the state? Is what,
You're saying right there that you wouldn't, because
Right.
oftentimes you can permit a project within it as long as you meet the standards or the required mitigation to work in that area.
right, I guess we have to go look at what that 1059 is. This came from Matt. I guess we gotta pull up that CMR and see whether, and I can't tell whether this was originally put under. Would we say that? And whether we wanna. Yeah, I guess it's a good point. I guess, and whether I
So
would,
I guess the question is, if they went through the process of permitting it through visa or fisheries and wildlife, would you consider that? And they actually did disturb habitat, but mitigated for that, would you still permit it as long as it was approved by the state?
I guess if
Or
they.
fisheries and wildlife?
If they permit it and mitigate it, does that mean it doesn't have any total adverse effect? I guess I don't know what what their threshold is. I don't know what the threshold is. I guess I have to pull up. Okay, we're gonna
Well,
have
they
to,
would take it through it would go through a whole review.
right. And I guess have we ever had it? I guess I've never seen it enough to know whether we do. Is your sense that it's a fairly rigorous process? That we don't need to be
I
more.
do, yeah, it is. It is. If you're dealing with estimated or rare habitat as identified by fisheries and wildlife or natural heritage.
Okay. Guess I have to, I guess we have to ask Matt about this. To see, this wording came from him. Whoops. Oh, this new silly thing here. You gotta post your comments. Silly. Okay, then this is to be discussed further. I'll reword this. Aim at being more stringent than the state. I'll reword this thing here. But okay, to be discussed, and we should go look at what 10-5 on, because then it would mean that. This question is then we wouldn't have this, we wouldn't need to have this at all. If it met, I guess, can they do a project if they don't meet the state endangered species stuff? If they don't get approval from the state, could they still do the project?
No,
Okay,
not in an established natural heritage area.
okay, and the question, I guess the question is whether this is applying it more to.
You wouldn't approve something until you got a letter or a determination from natural heritage that it was a no take, because they file simultaneously with the town, the
applies
state,
to the whole
and
buffer
fisheries
zone
and
as well.
wildlife.
That applies to the whole buffer zone as well, not just the resource area. And I guess you can't, I guess their land that you can't do anything on, is that independent of whether it's wetland or buffer zone?
Well, it's typically in a buffer zone of some sort because it's hard to administer if it's not, because what application would they file?
Right.
So most everything is associated with some kind of a resource area.
Okay, we'll check on this. Let's not, I don't think it's worth, we'll have to talk with Matt and go and read it ourselves again. Okay, so this one we have to go.
Sorry, just one quick question on that. If, is it someone who wants to develop a property, is it their responsibility to make sure it's not specified habitat of rare vertebrate or whatever, of rare species, or is it just, I mean, a lot of people wouldn't even think
No,
about
they
it.
have to do it. All of our NOI, it's part of the NOI process. I don't know if it's part of the IDA, the NOI process. They have to get a letter of clearance from the state.
Okay, thank you.
Species, so that's part of the standard process. That's why I'm curious how why he has it here. So something.
Is there any difference between state-defined resource areas and town-defined resource areas there? Because I mean, that might be one place where it could be different.
Well, we have the same resource areas. We don't have a difference.
Isolated wetlands are different, right?
I guess, right. Oh, yeah, we have the isolated ones. We have the buffer zone around some stuff. Then I guess. So I guess we need this maybe just to basically cover all of our stuff.
Can I ask one more question? Sorry, I don't mean to be.
Oh, no, keep going. That's all right.
Suppose there's a rare and endangered species on a piece of property, but it's not listed in the state or the town's not aware of it. And if that becomes to our attention, is that something that we need to consider or let the state know, or?
I don't know how that works in terms of how it would ever come to our attention that. I guess the state has its definition and whether it's continually getting changed.
But if there's a rare or endangered species list and we could identify a rare or endangered species that's not on their properties, I mean, not on their list, but actually exists there, is there anything that actionable on our part on that?
I thought there was a way to
So there's
report changes to this,
No.
to the,
Right,
but it would be
right, exactly.
independent of somebody applying for a permit.
But that's a whole different thing. So there's you can go and you can determine they've already got an overlay where these areas are that they have determined. If you suddenly find something that's on the endangered species list, you would contact Natural Heritage or Fisheries and Wildlife and explain to them what you found. There's a certain process for documenting things. That's a whole separate thing. But and finding something doesn't necessarily do anything until it's been documented and added into the overlay.
Yeah, I guess, do we want to have the regulatory ability to act before it's not added to the overlay? Is a little what I think is what Steve's asking.
No, we can go that far, but if it comes to our attention, is there a process? It sounds like when Joyce says there is.
There is a process. If you saw Blanding's turtle, you could go on their website and they tell you exactly how to report it.
Right. In fact, that's what we recently told somebody else who was commenting about a project that might have something. And we said we sent them to National Heritage to go pursue that issue there so that it gets identified, that it gets captured at their level. Okay, so I don't think we need to add something about that. That's a separate process. Okay, I guess we're gonna have to look a little more at this and just have Matt explain what it is as to why he's got this in here versus the fact that isn't it already in place. Okay, we'll come back to this. Then we have these other three things here. This is the new lots one. That's going to be somewhat, is a sort of a new sort of extension of things. And then there's the softening that we came up with here at our last meeting. So I'd suggest people reread this carefully, because this is one of the more substantive changes or additions.
My question about this one is the softening that we're doing here the type that we want, as opposed to something that's more giving the commission an out if we discover a important reason that we didn't think of in advance, versus we will let applicants put permanent structures here if they go through their list of here's the evidence and say, yeah, there's no impact for all these things.
Right, that's this versus thing here. I don't know. What do people think about this?
Michael, I feel like I don't know that we actually need to include that highlighted part. I mean, what we're really trying to do is kind of do the same thing that we were talking about earlier with protecting the 50 to 100 from substantial changes. And I feel like, I mean, this does, the way it's written, it does allow leeway that somebody could put a house right at the 100 line, and still we might allow grading or landscaping within the 100, which I think that even is being somewhat more permissive than I'd like to see if we're talking about a new undisturbed piece of land.
This doesn't make that distinction, though.
No, it doesn't.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the question of like how this interacts with the
Right.
standards for the 50 to 100.
Because this the way it's phrased here says that even if it's fully developed, has existing structures on it, we won't permit new ones
Right.
after lot changes or lot structure
Right.
changes.
That's right. That's why this is that's why I think why last time, I think some of this came with Kurt talking about it, that we came up with this highlighted thing to give some softening, because right, it could be all developed property, for example. And that seems to go, we already have, in a sense, protection against if it's undeveloped above. I mean, other towns have this kind of thing. I guess I'd have to go look and see. I think Dover has, or Lincoln, I can't remember. I guess it's been such a long time. I'm gonna go back and see what.
Yeah, Lincoln has that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what the wording is around it, though.
It was very broad. I think we should check, but I think of it as being basically, we will not allow
Yeah, I
development.
had it in a file that I had sent out previously. I sent out with other town stuff. I think I included the Lincoln one. And this somehow, well, I'm not, let's see, it's getting a little late. Whether pop the Lincoln one. The question is whether, just in principle even, let's get clear where, I mean, we could obviously, we'll be reviewing this in the next hearing, but is this where we want to be, or in terms of I think I somehow feel like we need some sort of softening because who knows what it's gonna look like and how developed or disturbed an area might be. That might change. That it's not an ironclad, there's no new permanent structures. So I think we need some sort of qualifier. The question is whether it's the qualifier like we had here. For me, at least, here, or versus some sort of wording like Jacob saying of that it's in our discretion. Sometimes I don't like having things that are just at our discretion without being more precise. I guess I'd like to hear people agree that we need to have some sort of softening way out here and which way to go on it.
Okay, I'll just weigh in quickly. It seems like you could soften it without being as specific as that highlighted phrase is. And you do say in the normal course, maybe you could say that slightly differently. So it isn't like the highlighted phrase is almost an invitation to, it sounds like an invitation to
I know what you
work.
mean. I don't know, right? Or some wording. Others?
Michael, question for you. It feels like 5.2.4.46 is kind of elaborating on the highlighted area. How are those how were you thinking those would interact with each other?
I don't know. Read it.
Well, I think 5.2.4.6 is saying if somebody wants to propose a project which will be a net benefit overall, we might permit portions of that work that we might not otherwise, that wouldn't be allowed on their own, if that's the only thing they were doing. I could see that actually being, now, Carol, now that you say that, I could see that being the thing that softens the one above. Because if you have an existing lot that has existing structures on it, and you want to build a new one, maybe you have to remove a bunch of some of the other ones, or something of that form, and enough to be a net benefit.
Yeah. I think it's a little clearer too, actually, because it's a little more specific.
I agree with that.
I like that idea as well, but I don't feel like I have the mental capacity right now to fully think it through. But it strikes me as good.
So
that would also remove the invitation concern. Well, I don't know, remove it, but it would lessen it.
So when we're defending this and people question it, if it just ended here, I guess, right, we could just point out that the next section allows something if it's an overall improvement. And I guess.
I actually like that, because I think that is the kind of things we would consider. It's not just up to our discretion. It has to be a net benefit.
Right, obviously defining may allow work that hinges right, I guess it all hinges on that phrase.
Michael, in the next sentence, it says have negligible impact. So I think it does get the,
No,
Very-
that's in addition to that, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's a separate thing.
but it kind of overlaps with what you just crossed out, I think, very similar.
You mean up above? Yeah, I mean,
Correct.
that thing there. Sometimes, yeah, I guess at one point I wanted to separate that out as a separate section. But I guess we can keep it because it's really a different concept. It goes into this whole temporary and in nature. Which is this 5.4.6 is a major concept. Almost, I don't know, do people okay combining them, or should we make this temporary thing a separate bullet?
I almost wonder if the temporary thing belongs in this section. There's a later section that talks about exempt activities. And I almost wonder if it belongs there.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. I think it's still useful to have it here.
Yeah.
Because some of it's not exempt, they still need permitting, like the soil testing and everything else. So I think we need to keep it here because it's because this stuff still needs permitting versus stuff that doesn't. I mean, I'm tempted to just make this a new 5.2.4 because it's such a different kind, just to make the one before it. I don't want it to dilute the one before it. Because this is a big deal. Okay. I guess this doesn't seem to have enough. 1.2.
I'm not actually,
Yeah.
it needs to be through.
Right. Question is, what does this add compared to the 0.6 above to this one here? This is just for proposing restoration and mitigation work, I guess. Is this, do we need this? It's really for restoration. Mitigation means that it's part of a whole project. If somebody wanted to just do restoration, I'm just wondering why we even have this here. This mitigation is usually in the context of they're doing something else. I don't know. What do people think of this kind of edit?
It's reasonable.
So doesn't restoration imply that they've done something that you want them to fix?
No, I'm thinking of it in the case of where something's already disturbed and they want to restore it. Well, maybe we don't need this thing. But I guess I'm thinking if somebody wanted to come in and like our recent effort.
But why wouldn't that apply to mitigation too? Like if they go to propose a project and need to do mitigation, wouldn't you want to prove that if they're taking down buffer zone to create a wetland, wouldn't you want them to prove that it's not going to do more damage?
Yeah, but I think that somehow seems part of everything else. I guess I'm wondering whether we need this section at all. Or do we want all projects? I mean, I don't know if we're holding to the standard of everything. Every project should result in an improvement. I guess now I'm wondering why we have it, what this means. Or is this a general thing that applies to all the projects above?
Well, Michael, I don't think we do generally say that any work is going to improve the existing conditions. We say it won't
Adverse
negatively
effect.
impact, right?
Right,
So
so why, so what is this standard coming from? What would we apply this to?
yeah, I don't know.
So. Right.
You know, where did this come from? The idea that, I mean, one concept I could think, one example I could think of is if it's in a 100-foot buffer that has a lot of invasives, and you know, the proposal will be that all of that will be, you know, removed and replaced with natives. That's the one that jumps in my mind about in a real world example.
Right, I mean, generally, I don't know if this would ever apply, because except for something that's just focusing on improving the wetlands or restoring disturbed areas. Or I guess restoring, since we already have that.
Oh, Michael, I was actually referring, I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't. I was referring to the wording in 5.2.4.6, but it looks like you're down further
Oh.
down. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm worried about what this one here, I see what you're talking about. Improves, I see, okay.
Yeah, I guess when I read that, I thought that was interesting that's what we were saying. So I thought that you were picking up on that again.
No, I think 6 is that gives us an out to say, if a project is actually going to make things better net, we can
Right.
skip other provisions that would otherwise make us ban a particular or deny a particular project.
Yeah, I like it that it improves. That it's not just, well, we don't have to fight about, oh geez, that it gives a way out. Again, we're talking a way out for this subdivision thing too. That they have to show that it actually will improve it, as opposed to just of course, defining improve is going to be, of course, tricky.
I'm sort of going back to the last one. I'm not sure why we need it.
Right, I'm not sure either, unless we need it for restoration projects, but anybody comes in for a restoration project, all the stuff above could just apply. Guess we can ask Matt. This came from Matt. Oh, Christ. Okay, maybe we don't need it. We'll ask him. Okay, we're through with this. Now it's getting late. Okay. I guess I will the stuff we've agreed on, like dropping all this stuff here. I might add a few more comments. I won't delete anything, but I think I'll see if I add anything here when I do my review of parameters. And I will clean it up a little and send it to Matt and ask him if we could and get his comments to what extent and see whether he could show up at the next meeting. to go over this.
Michael, when you have the next version that you want all of us to read through, can you include a version that doesn't have any red line? It's just the post-edit version, because there's a lot of, at this point, we've accumulated a lot of changes.
Oh,
and
yeah, no,
we're gonna-
I'll accept the edits for the stuff we've already agreed to. Oh, yeah. It'll be like the last time where I accepted, I just had a few red comments separately. I know I will like this whole thing here. I'll drop all of this. And that, and down here, where we decided to get rid of this around the lots, I'll delete that too. So, so that'll all be deleted. Yeah, and all this will be accepted. This will be deleted. I guess this is where he had it. This is where he had in the outer buffer zone is where Matt had this thing about the rare species that I'm not quite sure where. Oh yeah, and I guess we didn't do this disturbance too much now. I'll leave in some of this mess of where we're trying to figure out how to define whether we have to do both the positive defining undeveloped as well as defining developed, whether we have to do both or just one. Something that that's too much for now, and this other stuff will get deleted. Okay. Let's see now, next meeting. Joyce, what's our schedule looking like for the next meeting? We have at least one NOI. What do we have? And there's a week for stuff to
So,
come in.
yep, 1 second here. We have, I started an agenda, 1 minute. So at 7:20, we have the new notice of intent for the house on Hunting Lane, the one we did the ANRAD for. And then at 8 o'clock, we have the continued 60 Washington Street request for determination of applicability. I had a conversation with the homeowner on that one, and she and I are going to, she would like to work with us on that, coming up with a solution for that unpermitted work. And I think we're going to get together on that. And so that's at 8. So we have something at 7:20, we have something at 8.
Is that going to
And at the
come
moment,
be under an RDA, or is that going to turn into an enforcement order? Well, that's
no, it's a friendly enforcement.
Yeah, we discussed, you said it was a friendly enforcement.
Yeah, it's a friendly enforcement. And so we'll probably, I don't know that we'll get rid of the RDA, because as I thought about it some more, is that part of what we permitted to do the mitigation for the stuff that came down? So anyway, that's on at 8 o'clock. I do suspect that there is one more ANRAD that will be filed, because the deadline is next week, next Thursday.
Right.
And that ANRAD will be for Brush Hill Road, a property up on Brush Hill Road. And so again, now 7:20, and then 8 o'clock. We won't have any discussion at 8 o'clock, so I think that we'll put the ANRAD on for 7:50. I don't know how far we'll go. I don't know if we'll walk the line probably after we open the hearing. We'll set up a meeting to see, and set up a site walk to see who would like to walk it, like we have done with others.
So you don't think we're going to have,
So
we're not going to get, we're going to open the hearing, but we're just going to continue it because we won't have done the
we're going
site.
to open it. They'll do a presentation, and then we'll set up a site walk,
And it's an ANRAD or an RDA?
an ANRAD,
Oh, okay.
to review wetland lines.
Right. So that'll be, do you think the NOI is gonna take? Well, I guess it's limited to the 40 minutes anyway.
So if it's at 7:20 and we said 7:50, that would give them 30 minutes. I think.
Okay.
So,
Gotcha. So we
Yeah,
have
I don't think-
7:50
yeah.
that, I don't know how complicated the house thing is. I can't remember that one for some reason. Okay. And the Washington Street stuff, we don't know what state of the negotiation you'll be at.
yeah, I mean, we'll probably be continuing that one again.
So
But,
I'm just trying to think of
I'll know
the,
more.
so we don't know how much far we get. We could always, if we make our hearing for this one, move this one to, let's say, 8:20 or 8:15. We can always open and move it to later in the meeting or move it to the next meeting, depending on how much goes on with 16 Washington Street.
So why don't you set it up for 8:10?
Oh, because you don't think just in case we don't have much on 60 Washington. Okay,
Correct.
fine. Okay. Okay. I move that we continue this hearing until 8:10 on September 7th.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Michael, I. Matt,
All right,
Courtney,
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
Carol,
I,
Jacob.
Aye.
Okay, so Matt, I guess, did you have any, I guess you didn't have any comments of much on the reg thing, unless, whatever. Okay,
I'll take a look at the next draft.
okay,
Just to be clear, we're, the next meeting, our next meeting is on the 7th.
right,
3 weeks.
okay. Yeah. Okey doke. Let's see, is there anything else that we need to deal with tonight?
Just remind me, do we have the letter for the select board for Coolidge?
That we've already approved what the letter will be, we just have to
Okay.
write it and get it done.
I just wanted to
That's a
check.
question for Joyce, whether she will be able to draft that. or not.
Yeah, I want to draft that and then we'll see if you all have a few minutes next week to go over that.
Well, it's due on,
21st, I
it's
think.
due on Monday.
Okay.
Question is whether you can draft it tomorrow. And we can get it done over the weekend, need be. Okay, then that's it. I move to adjourn at 9:55.
second,
Geez, I expected at least 3 or 4 quicker seconds. So we're getting late. Okay, everybody, any further discussion? Roll call vote. Michael, I. Matt,
Aye.
Courtney,
Aye.
Jacob,
Aye.
Carol,
I.
Steve.
Aye.
Okay, I guess Arthur, whoops. I see that we have a guest here. Art Fennell. I don't know whether he's here for anything, even though we've already closed the meeting. But the meeting is closed.